What up, though, y'all? How y'all living? What's the deal with you? I came across this documentary about Martin Luther King, and let's just say I was flabbergasted, to say the least. Some of this stuff I had heard before, some of this stuff I never heard. Uh, we gonna call this
I
BD
have some very sad news for all of you,
before Diddy.
and that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis.
Robert Kennedy made that stunning announcement, followed by a beautiful impromptu speech as he campaigned for president in 1968. His words are memorialized by this sculpture of the two men reaching out to one another. And exactly 2 months later, RFK himself would be assassinated. But what no one in the audience knew, and what few people in the world knew, was that Kennedy had previously approved a massive surveillance campaign against Martin Luther King, including wiretaps of his home, office, hotel rooms, and colleagues. And as information from those tapes continue to come out, they contain some explosive allegations. According to recently uncovered FBI documents, the most...
Here we go. Now, this is a channel called Elephant in the Room. I seen them break down a couple of different things, but this one stood out to me the most. Nah, let's get it.
Shocking charge is that King himself looked on and encouraged another preacher as he raped a woman in a hotel room. And if you...
Wow. You heard that, right? And the thing about some of these stories is some of these events are transcribed by FBI wiretaps, and some of these events had witnesses. But let's go on.
You think politics today is extreme, you're going to be blown away by how this story unfolds between King and the FBI. I'm talking communist spies, break-ins, murder, orgies, and the US government actually trying to get Martin Luther King to kill himself. It's wild. What I learned is
this whole orgy thing is getting out of hand. What is going on here?
Disturbing on a number of levels. So why on earth did the Kennedy administration wiretap and follow Martin Luther King and his associates? After all, the Kennedys were solid supporters of civil rights, and publicly they supported King himself. It all started with the fight against communism. And it's important to understand the times as well as the power and role.
Boy, you can't talk about America without bringing up communism. Now, for most of y'all don't know, is FBI to Hollywood in America after the Soviet Union was on this big roll of everything or anybody that could be communist or communistic. And really, they used this word to investigate and ruin the careers of a whole lot of different people that may not have never been communists in the first place. What's his name? Ronald Reagan? Yeah, Reagan, the actor. He was one of the biggest snitches for people being accused of being a communist. He would write down names and hand them over, when really I think initially he might have been accused of being a communist. So he decided to start accusing people instead of being accused himself.
Of the FBI. When J. Edgar Hoover took over the agency in 1924, he turned it into one of the most effective law enforcement.
Now, some of y'all may not know because his name on buildings, but J. Edgar Hoover was one of the biggest thieves the American government ever had as an employee. He kept 3 Cadillacs at all time, running with the with the temperature at exactly where he liked it. Oh man, no, we're not even gonna get into J. Edgar Hoover. Let's go.
Machines anywhere. The FBI pioneered things like fingerprinting, forensic science, and criminal profiling. It set a gold standard in solving crime. And you can't really separate the FBI from Hoover himself. He took over the agency when he was just 29 years old, and he ruled it for 48 years until he died in 1972. And during much of that time, America was in the midst of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and they were a formidable adversary. That fight was at the heart of the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the world has never come closer to nuclear war than the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. The threat was...
And we still going at it with these same people, and they call Trump crazy for trying to make peace with them. I don't know what to say. I can't tell you one way or another, but it is quite funny that we still got problems and conflict with these same motherfuckers, so-and-sos.
Real. And communists infiltrated the U.S. government and cultural spheres, from spies to Hollywood influencers. Hoover's crusade against communism was important for the country's national security, although we'll see at times it veered into the realm of obsession and corruption. The FBI collected an enormous amount of surveillance on enemies, as well as on politicians and other powerful people in the country. Hoover used those secret files to not only fight communists, but to maintain his own power as FBI director. Everyone, including presidents, were fearful of being targeted by Hoover. One of those
That's because Hoover had dirt on everybody. But when you look at it, look at the stuff that they using as dirt. Look at the stuff that they using as dirt. You expecting fellatio from your wife could have been looked at as dirt back then. Shit, Hoover was an undercover, homogenized milk drinker and suspected cross-dresser. So, and then you could make up stuff on people back then. We talking about the 30s and 40s. You could say somebody was a witch or a devil worshiper or anything that just ruined somebody's credibility.
Targets was this man, Stanley Levison, a lawyer from New York and also one of the Communist Party's top financiers in the 1950s. The Communist Party was somewhat influential in the United States during the 1930s, although that lessened as the Cold War with the Soviets heated up in the 50s. Levison publicly supported the party at first, but in 1956 started hiding his involvement. That was also the same year he met a young Martin Luther King and became one of his closest friends and advisors. Levison negotiated.
But see, this crazy. This is crazy here. Henry Ford supported Hitler. As a matter of fact, Hitler supported Henry Ford because Henry Ford started with the anti-Semitic literature. And the Dearborn Chronicle, I think it was, Henry Ford's newspaper, was what Adolf Hitler was reading that inspired Mein Kampf, which is My Struggle in German. But they don't tear them down, do they? But let's go.
Business deals for King. He prepared his tax returns. He even co-wrote a draft of King's famous I Have a Dream speech. In 1962, when the Kennedys learned of that relationship and Levison's past, they sent King, who'd now become a national leader, numerous warnings through various messengers. When King rebuffed them all, Robert Kennedy, as Attorney General, approved the FBI wiretapping of Levison's office. Later that year, when King was employing another man with ties to communists, the Kennedy administration freaked out a little bit more and stepped up the surveillance. And finally, when a wiretap picked up King referring to Levison as his friend and saying that he'd resume connections once things cooled off, that pushed the Kennedys into wiretapping King's home and office.
Now, this is kind of weird because they made the wiretapping on Martin Luther King look like it was all a J. Edgar Hoover thing. So this puts a whole new spin on this, the wiretapping of Martin Luther King, or who really was investigating his life and or why. But let's go.
Ironically, throughout all of the wiretappings and informants and everything else, there's absolutely nothing to imply that King sympathized with communists. It was the opposite. He called it an alien philosophy contrary to the civil rights movement. But soon, the FBI wouldn't be focusing on communist ties anymore. They'd be focusing on sex. The Bureau expanded its electronic surveillance to King's hotel rooms on the road and had at least 2 of his employees working as paid informants. They tracked his flights and they monitored his associates. And they learned about a lot of sex. Now, King was married and a reverend, but the FBI records show numerous recordings of him having affairs, multiple sex partners, and even taking part in orgies. As this surveillance continued, Hoover's personal feelings towards King grew into hatred, and the FBI's role changed from gathering information to discrediting and harassing King. That campaign was part of a broader one called COINTELPRO, which targeted people and groups the FBI considered a threat to national security.
Which is everybody, anybody, whatever.
Some of the Bureau's activity was clearly illegal, and they were working to infiltrate, discredit, and disrupt political organizations inside the United States. These include,
what's purely evil is that the KKK and some of these white nationalist groups have been around almost longer than the FBI, and they've been killing people, lynching people, involved in drug trafficking trades, trafficking people. But they're still around as an organization. And these black organizations, no matter how prosperous their message is or their actions and activities, white men get them up out of there immediately, fast, quick, fast, over with. But these horrible white organizations that have no good in them at all be able to operate for 100 years.
Included the Communist Party, the KKK, the Black Panther Party, and others. The FBI would sow discord in the groups through psychological warfare, spreading misinformation, creating fake documents, or sending anonymous letters to get people paranoid. They used legal means sometimes. Sometimes they sparked IRS audits, Sometimes they did petty things like setting off fire alarms. The Bureau also likely arranged the killing of Fred Hampton, a Black Panther leader, as well as another Panther. An FBI informant had actually drugged Hampton the night before a planned raid. Police fired over 100 rounds, and Hampton was shot at close range in his bed. Now, with Dr. King, the Bureau's goal was to expose and ruin him, and the sex tapes were their weapon. The most infamous tactic they used.
See what I mean? This is before R. Kelly, before Bill Cosby. This is BD, before Diddy. You know what I'm saying? Wow. Using black men's sexuality to destroy who they are as a person is diabolical. Let's start there.
Was a suicide letter. The letter was written and sent by Assistant FBI Director William Sullivan, who headed the campaign against King within the Bureau. He sent a best-of audio tape of King's sexual activities and included a letter as if it was from a disillusioned Black supporter. It told King to listen to his adulterous acts and sex orgies and evil playmates, then suggested that he should kill himself by Christmas or the information would be leaked. Now, for many years, all of this stayed secret. The FBI had tried to plant stories on King's behavior in newspapers, but none of them took the bait. It was a different time then, and things like that just didn't get reported, which was fortunate for both King and the Kennedys. And as crazy as all this seems, here's where the story takes another bizarre turn. On March 8th, 1971, Muhammad Ali faced off against Joe Frazier. They called
one of the biggest fights ever. Some say it was set up.
Called it the fight of the century, and it was truly one of the biggest events in sports history. Pretty much everyone was watching or listening to it, which is why a group of 8 activists chose that night to break into a small 2-man FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania.
In other news, the FBI is reported preparing to shut down some of the 500 small agencies it maintains around the country because of security reasons. Last month, more than 1,000 documents were stolen from the FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania.
They called themselves the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI, and they rightly believed the Bureau was overstepping its bounds and infringing on American citizens' rights. The burglars, who were never caught or punished, although they did come out later, stole over 1,000 classified documents, and their gamble paid off. They actually found documents that exposed COINTELPRO. They mailed them to news outlets, but only one of them, the Washington Post, verified them and eventually ran a front page story. It set off.
Which is crazy because they was doing all of this with absolutely no oversight. Nobody knew. I mean, I guess except for the Black people who was complaining that nobody ever believed, but we're going to digress from that part.
A national scandal. This wasn't just an overreach by the FBI. It was evidence that the government was willing to shred the Constitution in the name of national security. The scandal helped kick off the Church Committee, a Senate task force that conducted extensive investigations into the intelligence activity of the FBI, CIA, and NSA. It led to some significant reforms and, ironically, led to the discovery and exposure of many recordings of Martin Luther King. In 1977,
now this one, it gets crazy.
U.S. District Judge John Lewis Smith ordered that all electronic surveillance of King be taken out of the FBI's hands and given to the National Archives. It was to be sealed and then made public after 50 years. But King's sexual encounters didn't come to light because of the FBI, but because of his best friend.
It's always somebody's friend, man. Let's get into it.
Reverend Ralph Abernathy. By all accounts, Abernathy was King's closest confidant and the man he named as his successor. Yet in his
That mean if he was doing any of this stuff, you was down there with him.
1989 book, And the Walls Came Tumbling Down, Abernathy gave a sobering account of King's final night before being assassinated. He wrote that King was intimate with 2 different women that night, and then a jealous third woman came by in the morning, and an argument escalated into an assault. Abernathy wrote that King knocked her across the bed, and for a moment they were in a full-blown fight, with Martin clearly winning.
And you ain't trying to break it up. You just stood there and watched. Now y'all telling me Martin Luther King was beaten. And this happened right before he died. We sure she ain't kill him? What is going on here?
Rights leaders went hard after Abernathy, but he never backed down. Now, I couldn't find an electronic version of this book anywhere on the internet, so I did take some pictures of those relevant pages, and I've linked to them down below. Later, tapes released of First Lady Jackie Kennedy after her death also contained some startling comments.
Then he told me he would tape that the FBI had of Martin Luther King when he was here for the Freedom March. And he said this with no bitterness or anything. How he was calling up all these girls and arranging for a party of men and women. I mean, sort of an orgy in the hotel and everything.
You mean he was doing all the stuff that same stuff your husband and your brother-in-law, who you suspected of sleeping with too, was doing, huh? And this is a cute white girl, but on her best day, she couldn't touch Michelle Obama. That's a fact. But let's continue, Miss Jackie Kennedy.
Oh, yeah. And first he said, oh, you know, and I said, oh, but Jack, that's so terrible. I mean, that man is, such a phony man. I just can't see a picture of Martin Luther King without thinking, that man's terrible.
But years later, as documents were released surrounding President Kennedy's assassination, some of the MLK records evidently accidentally slipped into the National Archives website, and they sat there for 2 years. Enter a man named David Garrow. He's a serious writer and historian who's concentrated on the civil rights era. His 1986 book on King, Bearing the Cross, took him a decade to write and won the Pulitzer Prize. He's also written one of the most definitive biographies of President Obama. Garrow spent weeks poring through tens of thousands of documents. Many were internal memos or summaries of the FBI tapes, and they were stunning. The FBI records from many of the wiretaps, interviews, and surveillance shows that they believed that King had been sexually involved with at least 40 women.
40 women, and they tracked all these women. So that'd be the problem with church. That's why my granddad didn't go to church, boy. So they traveling the country fucking everybody's wife. This is crazy.
Including prostitutes. He had threesomes, foursomes, and more. When his wife, Coretta King, told her husband he wasn't fulfilling his marital responsibilities, FBI notes say that King told her she should go out and have some sexual affairs of her own. The FBI files also include allegations that famed baseball player Don Newcomb told the FBI that King had fathered a child with his relative, King's longtime girlfriend in Los Angeles. But the most shocking notes are the
Wow. The thing about this is this comes from an investigation, man. So even if they put in a 2 on the 10, some of this is apparently true.
Allegations of what happened in a hotel room in 1964. King and his colleagues were staying in the historic Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C., near the White House. The FBI placed transmitters and lamps in 2 of the rooms, and then set up surveillance teams with receivers and tape recorders in nearby rooms. In the second bugged room was Logan Kearse, a Baltimore pastor, civil rights leader, and King's friend. The FBI summary says that Kearse had brought to Washington several women parishioners of his church. The group met in his room and discussed which women among the parishioners would be suitable for natural or unnatural sex acts. When one of the women protested that she did not approve of this, the Baptist minister immediately and forcibly raped her. On that type summary, Deputy Director Sullivan or one of his aides had added in handwriting that King looked on, laughed, and offered advice. Now, that's not a minor allegation. Critics have come out and said this proves nothing. These aren't audio tapes. They're not official transcripts.
Right, but that's you bet. But there are official transcripts. If the investigating officer got shorthand and we know they was wiretapping, then that means it is official transcripts. And you saying another dude watched? Oh man.
Scripts, and they're just notes from an agency that absolutely hated King. And that's a good point to consider. I've gone through hundreds of pages of those records, and they're pretty clearly internal documents, not something designed for public consumption. And Garrow makes the point that in the 1960s, no one in the FBI would have imagined that these notes would have ever seen the light of day. That doesn't prove they're correct, of course. But years later, they were reviewed again by the Bureau. According to Garrow, without question, Sullivan and his aides had both the microphone-transmitted tape recording and a subsequent full transcript at hand while they were annotating their existing typescript. In 1977, Justice Department's investigators would publicly attest to how their own review of both the tapes and the transcripts showed them to be genuine and accurate. The FBI reports continued on to say that the next night at the Willard Hotel, King was part of an orgy with about a dozen people. Quote, when one of the women shied away from engaging in an unnatural act, King and several of the men discussed how she was to be taught and initiated in this respect. King told her that to perform such an act would, quote, help your soul. Now,
whoa. Women be going through too much or going for too much when it comes to these preachers and leechers. That's a fact.
An unnatural act can probably mean a whole lot of things. But according to FBI notes, quote, King announced that he preferred to perform unnatural acts on women and that he had started the International Association for the Advancement of Eaters.
You can't make this shit up. You can't make this.
Wrote that anyone familiar with King's often body sense of humor would not doubt that quotation.
So Martin Luther King was a motherfucker. I heard he liked white women, or at least he did before he became Dr. Martin Luther.
Garrow wrote up these allegations in 2019 when Me Too was in full swing. The media reaction was, well, let's just say it was restrained. Multiple outlets rejected it. After it was published, most ignored it completely. Others made sure to pack in their stories with doubtful historians rather than seeking actual facts. The New York Times did that and also dredged up a time when Garrow lost his temper and allegedly grabbed a woman's wrist 20 years beforehand. The paper even found a feminist to say that exposing King's female companions was sexist in and of itself. Ultimately, we should hear the whole truth in January of 2027, which isn't that far away. Those audio tapes are scheduled to be released in full. Given King's popularity, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a legal challenge somehow, but that's where things stand now. And to be clear, King's popularity is entirely justified. When I told a good friend of mine about the topic of this video, he was like, why would you want to do that? And it was a good question. I don't take pleasure in tearing down our heroes. None of us should. Of course, it also makes us ask, if these charges are true, should he be our hero? How do we evaluate flawed people?
And that's the number one thing. If these charges are true, should he be our hero? To be honest with you, I'm starting to believe that these heroes are manufactured. And these heroes are selected with people who are not proper. You never see the guy, you never see the regular guy that helps the neighborhood accused of any of these type of things. It's always the massive guy who got all the donors, who's across the country doing. It's always him with this despicable and disparaging activity. You know what I'm saying? So I think we'll have to do better in that department.
We've recently seen a reckoning with the flawed lives of many celebrated Americans. Statues and monuments to leaders and former presidents like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington were removed by governments or torn down by mobs, not for their political acts, but for what we now see as their personal moral shortcomings. Should Dr. King be put in that category?
But what do you mean by personal moral shortcomings? Because that could be a blanket statement. That could be a very blanket statement. And a lot of these, and I don't think that it's a all-encompassing statement, because some of these guys have a more than a lack of morals going on based on the activities they had. And some of these guys are just foul and wrong. And the jury's still out on.
Should disgraceful private acts negate the public good that someone's done? Maybe.
Depending on what those public acts, those disgraceful private acts are. Him having orgies and being a freak, okay, I guess that's cool. But when you get to the point of saying that he was a rapist, that's not cool. And yes, that should have an effect on his public life.
The real takeaway here is that even our most admired heroes are imperfect human beings. Despite their failings, the founding fathers, including Dr. King, dedicated themselves to building a better world, and that seems worth celebrating. I'm Ken LaCourte. I do my best here to give you a balanced overview of things and to look at.
I don't know. I mess with this guy's channel. He pretty cool. Very, very, very informative. I'm not sure what I'm gonna do about Martin Luther King on this note here. It's to some degree it's saddening, but then to another degree it's like, what do you expect? You got a guy that's able to walk into rooms where it may be 1,000 people and 600 women, and out of the 600 women, 100 of them willing to do whatever he say or want him like that. Like, I guess that would have to be intoxicating. I guess you could lose your way dealing with that. I guess you could get out of pocket, but then there's certain things that's inexcusable. If you got women jumping over themselves to be with you, why would you be taking the pussy from somebody? And then if you're a civil rights leader and you like to have fun and frolic and one of your tenders get out of touch, do you really supposed to bare knuckle her in the hotel room right before you were assassinated? This guy was living pretty hard and hot. But then the thing about it is we judge people for living pretty hard and hot, but then it's like, would he have got the legitimate things he wanted accomplished if he wasn't living that way, or if he didn't have that mentality? And the truthful answer is probably not. So it brings us back to where we first started at. Who are we to judge? And by what criteria do we judge? And I think what we'll find in most cases is we are incapable of that judgment. We out. Crazy, Martin.